my day job is doing nothing but investing, dealing with investors, right? So from the card point of view, it was always just a fun collecting hobby.
What's up, wrestling fans, trading card collectors? Welcome to Wrestling with Cards. Today's video is an interview I did with Paul Anand. Paul's a lifelong collector with a vast wrestling card collection. But possibly more importantly than that, Paul is the creator of the Wrestling Card Price Guide. And I know what you're thinking, a price guide? In the real-time digital world that we live in 2021? Well, I think if you watch this video and let Paul explain what he has created, you will be pleasantly surprised at this great tool that he's made. In this interview, we talk about a lot of things wrestling card related. We're mainly focused on the price guide, why he decided to make it, what went into it, and how it can help collectors. But before we get into that interview with Paul, just a few reminders of how you can help support Wrestling with Cards. First and foremost, make sure to subscribe and hit the like button. That's greatly appreciated. Also, make sure to share this on social media. Tag wrestling fans, tag sports card collectors. Let's get more people involved. You can also check out the same name as this channel, Wrestling with Cards, in audio form, the Wrestling with Cards podcast. Also, make sure to check out Worlds Collide, a wrestling card podcast featuring myself, Tony Vella, two YouTube wrestling card personalities coming together to talk about all things wrestling cards. And if you really want to show your support, links down below to Patreon, and there's a link where you can even buy me a coffee because I gotta stay caffeinated. Hey, real quick, just wanted to throw out here, we did have a few technical issues with internet connections. You guys know how these Zoom calls go. So I tried to clean it up as much as possible, but I think most of the audio is good. Some of the video is a little choppy, but just bear with us as we get through this interview. It's worth it. Sit back and relax. Let's talk to Paul Anand from the Wrestling Card Price Guide. Paul from the Wrestling Trading Card Price Guide. Welcome to the show.
Zhan, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. Welcome. Finally, glad to have you on here. Let's just get a background into your hobby, kind of start where you got into collectibles, and then kind of transform that into the specifically wrestling cards.
I started collecting cards as a kid. Up here in Toronto, hockey was a big thing. So when I was 8, 9, 10 years old, my dad used to bring me home packs of hockey cards and open them up, and that was a thing for me. I remember in '79, the Gretzky rookie year, probably had 3 or 4 sets of those at that time. We were flinging those around like nothing with no idea of their future value. I also remember I was into stuff like Star Wars when that came out. I was right at the age of, I think I was 11 when Star Wars came out. I remember having stuff like Charlie's Angels cards, Happy Days. So I was into non-sport, and then I became a teenager and you fall out of it. And I recall in '85 when the first WrestleMania came out, that's when I was into wrestling as a kid. As a teenager, not so much. And then I was just going into university when WrestleMania, the first one, came out. And that's when I really got sucked back in. And I went and bought the '85 OPC set. And I think, Zhan, that's the only set that I've ever bought in packs specifically, because that's what it was. I bought a bunch of packs and I go, wow, and then I assembled the set, put them away, and forgot about them. And that was the start of some 35,000 wrestling cards 30 years later or whatever it is.
So are you still dabbling into anything else right now, or is it just all in wrestling?
The only other thing I have is Toronto FC soccer team soccer cards.
Sure.
So I've got the team set. They came into MLS in 2007. I'm a big soccer fan. I was born in England. So I just bought from the big releases, whoever put them out, it was Upper Deck, and I think Topps has it again. I just get the 7 or 8 cards, and I bought a few relics and a few autographs, and over the years, I've gotten myself a nice little binder of those. But it's basically been wrestling, but it's been wrestling along the way. So, this is it's a collection that's happened as the cards were being released, basically. So when we talk about the WCW autographs, of which I have 105 of them, I'm not chasing them now. I stopped chasing them a decade ago when we talk about that. But it's a different, you guys have talked a lot about the differences in collecting. And I remember in the early shows you used to talk about, well, you guys have all these cards and, aren't you flipping them and doing this kind of thing? You have to understand that if I was 30 years old and just getting started in life, then I would have that approach. But I'm in real estate and I own houses, and that's where I invest. And this has always been fun. And especially on the podcasts or on the Worlds Collide, you guys always talking about fun. NFT, is that fun? Is this fun? Is that fun? And I think you nail it right on the head when you talk about collecting being fun. So for me, it's always been a sort of labor of love, trying to get as much as I can. And you went down this road with Chuck. Our stories are very similar. You know, we bought stuff as we went along. And then in 2005, when Topps Heritage came out, that was the end of us really being able to get close to finishing anything. Once they started refractors and superfractors and then parallels,
sure.
it became impossible to accumulate sets. When I say master sets, I'm usually referring to the base set and all the chase sets. Now, a lot of the Fleer stuff, I have complete insert sets, I have complete autograph sets, as does Chuck. And that was the thing for the longest time, that he and I were the two sort of crazy guys out there that were chasing down all this stuff. And when I talk about the price guide, I'll talk about a guy named Grimm, who was sort of the expert in wrestling cards at the time. He used to tell me that, there's another guy out there like you. And it ended up that it was Chuck. We just didn't know each other back then.
So you
And
mentioned,
from there,
sorry, go ahead.
it grew.
So you mentioned,
and then from there,
you mentioned you're into real estate and you're doing soccer cards, which that's two different segments that are totally opposite of wrestling cards. Would you say that that helps you have more fun in the wrestling card space, or because it allows you to kind of take a mental break from focusing on them? You said you're not really chasing wrestling cards anymore. So can you kind of just touch on the mindset of how you're able to keep all of these cards? You're not really looking to sell them, or even if you're not looking to acquire more, these other things that you're into are allowing you to have those and kind of take a mental break and financially be able to just leave them all on the shelf.
Every day. I'm 53 years old now. When I was 23 and I was starting my first businesses, I would have had a completely different approach. And when I sold my second company, I got into real estate on the side as a hobby, bought properties with friends of mine, and fell into that as a full-time gig because I was having fun doing that. And I run a small independent brokerage in town called Plex Realty, and we focus on income-generating properties. So I deal with landlords and people looking to make money and looking to invest in real estate. So I know we're getting off topic, but this will sort of give you a mindset of how my day job is doing nothing but investing, dealing with investors, right? So from the card point of view, it was always just a fun collecting hobby. Now, I was well aware of grading, but I wasn't going out and buying 3 dozen of any one card because I thought it might be a play in the future. I was just trying to get, I don't have any doubles here. And that's the idea, is that I was just trying to get my hands on, because I was a wrestling fan, so as many different cards as I could. And I'm still collecting indie stuff. I'm still collecting every new release as it comes out, but it's difficult to go back and fill in holes now. The stuff that I'm missing, what I might have been able to afford for maybe a couple of $100 way back then, is thousands now, to be honest with you.
So that was my next question, actually, is how you're operating in the wrestling card hobby, and what exactly are you still buying, still chasing?
I am still buying everything, that all the new sets that come out, but more of it now is for the price guide. Since we got that site going, and I started doing the flip throughs that have been very well received, I like to have it not only for my own collection, but to put it out there as well. Love the indie sets. That's a new thing that Chuck and I have gotten into in the last couple of years, chasing down all these weird indie sets from all around the world, like foreign stuff. Husker has been one of the pioneers of finding stuff in Russia and China and India and Mexico and stuff all over the place. Now, the definition of cards are changing. Stickers are now cards, paper are now cards. So getting into things that I wasn't doing before. Japan, we just started with the Japanese sets on the website this year. COVID gave me a lot of time to spend on the website and sort of build it up.
Sure.
When Tony and David stopped in 2015, it left a bit of a hole in the market. So Chuck and I took it upon ourselves to sort of keep up with all the Topps releases. But that coincidentally just happened to be the time when things went bananas in terms of releases. We had so many indie sets. Topps Now started at that time. Topps On Demand started at that time, the exclusive Topps. So Chuck has been handling all that stuff. And we keep very close tabs on the independent releases because there's no one else out there that's sort of archiving it and keeping it all straight. And again, I was always a secondary site to WTC with prices and not based checklists. But again, when they stopped in 2015, didn't know they were coming back. In fact, I approached Tony, I think in 2018, let him want me to take over. Just because I felt that it was necessary, that what they had started needed to keep going. Now with their rebuild and Tony working diligently to get everything back, that was the whole idea of sort of putting this all together and say, okay, let's get these two sites working in tandem. And that's kind of how the collecting end of it for me goes, sort of with the site in mind now.
So question, let's just jump right into the wrestling price guide. I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, Paul, the internet is a thing. We've got eBay. We've got all these pricing tools. Why in the world would you want to start a wrestling price guide. This isn't the 90s with Beckett anymore. So just kind of give everybody a groundwork of what made you want to start a price guide.
Okay, so we got to go back to 2010, right? In 2010, there wasn't any pricing available anywhere, even by Beckett for wrestling. The guy I mentioned earlier, Grimm, he had a site called the Wrestling Card Universe, and he was the preeminent seller of cards back then. All of us bought from Grimm, some of us more than others. And we used to talk about that. It was a sort of thing that he said, this is something that should happen. So sort of a bunch of factors converged, and we produced the book in 2010. Now, if you've never seen the book, this is it. It was a printed copy. It was done like, we had lots of pictures, and it was everything up until 2010. And what was interesting, if you look at the back, we have advertising from TriStar, advertising the new era set.
Mm-hmm.
And that's as far as we got to with the book. 2 years later, Grimm disappeared. No one knows where he is now. None of us have heard from him since. And I thought, well, there's been new releases since. And again, for my personal collection, to try and carry on with the book. So we started adding 2011, 2012. Then we went back and created the sort of first versions of what the price guide is now. It's been through a lot of iterations over the years. But the idea was to, first of all, extend the book, but second of all, have somewhere where someone could go for free.
Sure.
To get some sort of sense of pricing. Now, let's speak specifically to the validity of my pricing or pricing of wrestling cards or any cards in general. It's a wrestling card price guide because you know as well as I do how fast this stuff changes.
Absolutely.
I go on to point, I go on to watch count, and I'm taking averages when we talk about the WCW stuff, and we look at recent sales. Today is a different story than a week ago, than 3 weeks ago. When you start taking averages and means and doing that kind of math on it, you're never going to get it exact, my man. You're going to get an idea. Now, Grimm had the idea taken from the old basketball and baseball magazines of what they had book and market. And it was basically a low to high. So the low would be, okay, if you catch a bit of a deal or what you might expect market to be is low, and then what it ought to be might be a little high. Now, that's where we set sort of our range. So somewhere in between there. Now, we had some rules. We never liked the high price to be more than double the low price. Now, Beckett does that. They'll have a low of 20 and a high of 75. That's just too big a range for us. The principle was, since Grimm knew the market and was selling the stuff, he had a pretty good handle on what the stuff was worth. So he did the original pricing. I did the compiling. We sort of went back and forth on it, and we came up with the prices that made the book. And there were some assumptions, if you take a relic card, a basic relic card, bucks or $10, and then you bill from there. You add a little bit if the performer is worth more, and then you start multiplying for multiple color swatches, and if there's blood on the swatch, et cetera, et cetera. And you've talked about this many times,
Sure.
What goes into the value of a wrestling card. But that was the essence of it. And then since then, we've been keeping it up. And when I say we, I say me and Chuck, because really, he's been a big part of it for the last 4 or 5 years now. Like since in around the time that WCT stopped, Chuck and I sort of really took my site more seriously insofar as making sure we had more stuff listed. And we've gone around to Anthony's site, to WTC, to Trading Card Database, all around the world, and we found as much as we can find. So I can safely say that on my site now, you're going to get as many sets as are out there, and I'm finding stuff all the time. Like yesterday, I found something called Loyal Subject Figures with 5 little cards in it.
Mm-hmm.
The micro ballers toys, for example, they had cards on it. You're finding stuff all the time. Then when I jumped into Japan, dude, that's a whole other big kettle of fish of stuff that we're finding all the time, miniature releases. Then you go back to the vintage stuff, the Peck England stuff, so much stuff there. A lot of it is postcards, a lot of it is Menko card, a lot of it is what they call vending kind of card. So it was a matter of, just trying to get and so I don't, the first thing you see on the site is a disclaimer saying, hey, this site is for fun, but we can't take any responsibility for use of any of these numbers. I've been around the hobby for 30 years now. I've been collecting and I've been following this stuff. So I feel like, given that we wrote the price guide and I learned a lot from Grimm, that I was qualified to take over. Now, if Chuck Davey can't tell you the value of a Topps Now card, nobody can. So we've got the source there. I'm talking to a lot of independent guys when I list the independent stuff. So we're trying to be as accurate as one can be, given what it is. if that
So,
makes sense.
yeah, it does. And that actually leads me into my next question, which was kind of how do you keep the guide somewhat up to date? Again, it's a guide, it's not supposed to reflect the exact prices at that exact moment. But what are some ways that you just go about updating? How often do you update, and what references are you using?
Since COVID, I've been doing it more. Since I've been speaking on these podcasts and stuff, I've been taking it a little more seriously because I realize that a lot more people are on the site now than have been before. Um, I, every year I would give at Christmas time I would give a rough look, but there's stuff that's still out from some of the early releases. Some of the flares are on. I would say in the last 2 months, I've gone over a lot of it, specifically the WCW stuff, dodging those. I'm more interested in stuff that I know people are looking at. There's a lot of stuff there, several hundred sets. So it's hard to go back and be accurate all the time. Because like I say, I can go today and go on to 130 point and update a bunch of things, and next week that's wrong. So not wrong, but the market has changed. Like even the WCW All-Stars now, 2 weeks ago a Savage was 2,000. Now it's back down to about 1,000, 1,200. Like that's a big difference, right? We'll talk about that when we talk about that set because I've been watching those prices very carefully. But just for general prices, we all know prices have gone up. We all seen what's happened with the base card winners in early stuff. But I've gone back and hit some of that stuff. For example, that paradox of how a 85 set might be worth $25, but hey, the Hogan by itself is worth 50. So when you have one card that's worth more than the sum total of the rest. So I've gone back and cherry picked some of those sets and gotten those right. And it's being done through these eBay souls. Again, it's not exact science because that information changes day to day, but that's the idea.
Yeah, just a guide, but that's good information on how you can compile that information. What would you say is a set or sets or type of cards in the price guide that has the most fluctuation that you're constantly having to go back and look back and forth, back and forth?
There isn't one particular set, but again, over the last 9 months with the spike in prices, a lot of stuff has risen. So, these All-Stars and the WCW autographs, because they're so hot now, there's so many people looking, we're zeroing in on them. But I'm sure there's more than what I've actually been doing. I'm sure there's a lot of sets. Like I'm real big on the Fleer stuff. Those are my favorite releases from 2000 to 2005, all those sets. And, like we see some of those going up, a lot of the girls going up, but then some of it laying flat, like, relic cards, for example.
Yeah.
They've not done so well, unfortunately. And I have a ton of them. But some of the autographs have done well, for example, and some particular like 2002 Royal Rumble set has 4 base rookies, So some of them better than others, but I don't really have a straight answer for you on what sets in particular. I don't want to use the word volatility because volatility suggests unstableness, and it's not that. But we know prices are really high now.
Yeah.
And they're going to come back down. How far down, I can't tell you. Are they going to implode? No, they're not. Are we going to see a 5, 10, 15% decrease in sort of the key cards now? No one's got a crystal ball, but that might be a fair guess. Grading, I think, is going to be affected by what's happening in that world and the delays and all that stuff. People are beginning to see that raw cards can have some value. Again, there's a lot to it, but all this stuff is done the way you do your shows, that this is a logical way to approach this stuff, but underneath it is fun. So do what floats your boat. You know what I mean? Like, what is it about the hobby that gives you the enjoyment? What gasses you about doing it? Being a player collector now, like Tony is, or being a completist like me or Chuck or Nick, or you're a guy that prides himself on finding stuff at a good price and then building that up into something, and all of a sudden you own a Prism Hogan that you got from something that you've built your way up to.
Yep, right.
Smart stuff. And you get a jolt off of that. Some guys that stuff. It's whatever it is that makes it work for you. That's the way I advocate. It's just got to be fun. Just enjoy it.
So you touched a little bit on the indie cards, and I would just like to get your perspective. Like, what is the market looking at a whole? Because you're looking at a lot of these prices. So there's so many types of indie releases out there. Some of them, like, people really clamor after. Some of them we just seem to never hear of. What's the market like in that aspect?
Good. A lot of people after them. Like, for example, the guys that do the figure podcast, they just released 50 sets. They sold out in an hour. I'm lucky to get one.
Yeah.
GCW. ECW. I mean, now Gage is on a high, especially with that dark side, but their stuff hard to get. If I want to go back and find stuff, find indie stuff, like you can't go back, so to answer your question, they weren't printed in huge quantities to begin with, and there's a lot of indie fans out there, man. So yeah, there's definitely demand. We're trying to keep up on them as best we can, but we're trying to get them as much as we are trying to keep up on them. And Chuck and I have sort of reserved ourselves that I'm not going to get all of them. And I have a bit of a fundamental problem here in Toronto that it's difficult to ship sometimes. And a lot of times people just don't want to bother with over the border. So there's some stuff that I'm aware of, but I know I'm not going to get. But we're always with each other. If you've seen this, you've seen that back and forth so that we've got it covered. But yes, Indy says they're going to, like, for example, the 2011 FCW, right? Mm-hmm. The one with Nintendo, right? That's a $400 card. You can't find those. You're just not going to find that set. They're like the Rax roast beef in my mind. There's an IPW set that we were talking about the other day that has Kenny Omega and it has the Briscoe brothers. Great set. And I have most of it. I have 2 black binders books there called the Indie Bible, and it's probably got 85% of the indie stuff that's been released. But you've got to be on it to get your copy because it could be sold out in no time.
Do you think maybe
And one more point.
Yeah, sure.
Quickly, a lot of guys that go to these shows take these cards to get signed, right? So there's a lot of people in our hobby that are wrestling fans and specifically go to the indie shows with these cards.
So do you think the maybe popularity on some of the indie sets I mean, of course they're fans, because if they're not fans and they're not taking them to the shows to get signed, they're not interested in them. But from a monetary perspective, I'm curious if maybe the 82-83 All-Stars kind of carries some weight into these other indie sets because they're like, hey, these are kind of first appearance cards of these wrestlers, and they don't necessarily have to be put out by Topps for them to be valuable at some point, besides the fact that they're just cool. So what do you think about that?
I agree. I was going to say maybe, but more I think about it, I think, yeah, because there's some sets, right, with first Keith Lee, first such and such, and these are the ones that people are going to want, and yeah, like the All-Stars wasn't the All-Stars until 10 years later. And all of a sudden we started buying them up, and so yeah, absolutely. There's a top set that came out in 2016 called Topps NXT.
Yeah,
it's extremely rare. Not a lot of people are aware of it, but basically the boxes only needed to buy like at least 15 boxes at $70 a box, right? So there's not a lot of complete sets out there. I don't have one. Chuck doesn't have one. So if the two of us don't have a set, it's rare.
Yeah.
So yeah, some of this stuff, particularly this early stuff, is getting harder to get your hands on. I have the 95 Panini. That's the only known complete set of that in the world. I've been chasing that down for a decade, as has Anthony. He has almost a set. I've seen singles, but I've never seen a complete set except for the one that I finally managed to buy this year. And it was obviously wasn't a huge release, but they're out there, those cards, but not a set, no way to put it together. So that's what could happen with some of this indie stuff. That you look at some of them, you go, wow, this is neat. Like the MWR has the Seth Rollins rookie.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff. All these guys.
So just kind of in closing, we've talked about how the price guide started, what you used to build it. What do you have planned for the future of the price guide?
Well, I want to keep it going. It gets a lot of people come to look at it. It's a good sort of quick way visually to see what happened in this year, to search by food type, by card type, by whatever you want to search. When WrestlingTradingCards.com gets updated and corrected or fully up to date, I suspect we'll have like a good 1-2 resource where you can go to Tony's site and get the images of the cards, you can get the checklists, and you can come to us and you can see the videos for the ones I have. You can get some rough pricing on the stuff. Like even women's division today I released, but it's what we call the unsettled market because people are paying more now for something that just came out from Topps last week than they will 6 months from now.
Correct.
So, I can't go back and fix everything all the time because because in the time that it takes to fix it, something else has come up. And there's a bit of time that is involved in university and things like that. And it's part of the thing that Chuck and I really enjoy is the archiving element of it, just staying on top and sort of being, having a good handle on the hobby from vintage day one right to present day.
Well, Paul, thanks for all of that great information. I hope everybody will actually start using the price guide instead of just thinking, oh, I'll use eBay. It is a nice guide. I've used it in conjunction with Trading Card Database, in conjunction with WTC. They're just great tools to use. Let everybody know where they can find you, the price guide, and anything else you want to plug before we get out of here.
The site is thewrestlingcardpriceguide.com. I'm on Twitter, same thing, Wrestling Card Price Guide. Hook up us there. And thanks everybody for using the site. It's been our pleasure to bring it to the wrestling card community, and we intend to keep it going.
Paul, thanks for coming on. Thanks you guys for watching. Thanks for hanging through our technical difficulties. Until next time, see ya. Once again, thanks to Paul for coming on to the show to talk about wrestling cards and help educate people with what went into the wrestling card price guide. And I really hope that a lot of you guys are going to take the information from today and start using the wrestling card price guide as a tool to buy and sell. And as always with these interviews, I like to bring different perspectives to wrestling cards, so I hope you could take that away from this as well. Because you guys know I'm always up for different ways of thinking about the hobby and different perspectives on wrestling cards. Or the world of just collectibles in general, because it's all kind of the same things. We collect different things just in different forms. And make sure to follow Paul on social media, links down below to the website and his Twitter account. And if this video brought you some value, if you want to help support the show, like I said, hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, make sure to share this with whoever you know that likes wrestling or wrestling cards. And if you want more great wrestling card content, click the videos on the screen, and I'll catch you next time.